Hello. Today we will be discussing how to approach the preservation of explicit content in a digital environment. And that is a mouthful. So we're going to jump right on into it. First, it is important to discuss how collections typically arrive in an archive or repository. Currently, donors donate their collections in a variety of formats, but they usually come in some kind of box or physical storage container, like so. Now, as we are moving further into the digital environment and into a digital world, we are transitioning rapidly into receiving collections that will look more like this. Or they will be in these types of containers, but we will have these buried in the bottom of the box or in little bags, or we might even get a collection of flash drives that someone forgot to remove from the container. Now, instead of field archivists going out and pursuing such collections where we are dealing primarily with physical materials, and that includes manuscripts, documents, records, the actual tangible works that we know and love and like to process, we're going to have field archivists going out, and they're going to be looking for collections like this, and SD cards and flash drives. Now, I'm not saying that we're going to lose all of our physical materials. No. But as we are moving into this transition into the digital age faster and faster, this is going to become much more prevalent. Now, I have a few questions for all of you. And if you'd like, if you could please raise your hands as I ask them, that would be very appreciative. And first of all, how many people have misplaced a flash drive? Okay. How many of you have loaned your flash drive to someone else and haven't had it returned, or before you gave them that flash drive, you didn't encrypt your files? Okay. That sounds about right. Now, what does this mean? And hopefully it means that they're not out there taking your papers that you worked diligently on and just plagiarizing them, or taking your family photos that you loaned that flash drive on and just putting them on the internet. But how are archives and repositories how we look at, the purpose of these questions is to get you thinking about how we manage our data. And it is important to remember that as we loan out these flash drives, as we lose them, they're still accessible. Even if you wash a flash drive, you can still utilize it for a period of time. You may have some data corruption, but at the same time, someone will be able to reconstruct that data. So it's important to remember that whatever we have on there, we want to make sure, as people in our field, we want to make sure that this content is secure. Now, it's also very important to remember that these collections, as they're coming into our repositories, are not only going to be pursued by the field archivists, but they're going to be looked at by processing archivists or processing digital technicians. The thing is that we, as they are accessing these drives, for instance, we have Grandpa and they donate their collection. As the processing archivist goes through his collection, you may or may not find some explicit content. Now, I'd like to take a moment first to talk about how this can interplay into our field. But real quick, a lot of what we're going to be discussing today and a lot of the visual imagery that's going to come up immediately, for those of you who are online, it may not be appropriate for children. So if you do have children in the room as you're watching this, you may want to ask them to go away. But again, this isn't high-level risk content here. As we look at this image, parental advisory explicit content, this appears on most content that parents and rating companies do not find suitable for children under a certain age. But how does this relate to our field? How does this particular advisory relate to what we do day to day? When we're putting together a finding aid, or when we're putting together our metadata, or doing our database work, it's important that we think about how this plays to the content. Because if we come across a collection that is specifically explicit, we don't want to do a bait and switch where we have metadata people putting in This is just a video. They did not know how to describe it, so they didn't. And as you look at the content, it's a particularly explicit image or it's racist materials. Now, next I'm going to talk about how to approach racist materials in a digital age. This image was retrieved from a local museum that collects and digitizes racist memorabilia. Now I want you to take a moment and look at this image and think about, if you're a processing archivist, how would you describe this? How would you approach this? We are looking at this image right now, and if we open up someone's flash drive as they donated to us, it's very, very easy to hit the delete key. At the same time, we don't want to necessarily do that, because this particular image is important in the sense that it brings context to a decade and an age where our history was at its worst. Just because these types of images make us uncomfortable in the field or we don't know how to deal with them does not mean we want to remove them. What I found through research is that most museums, archives, and repositories, when they come across materials like this, they do not tend to put in the actual information that is on the photograph. They will give you dimensions, they will give you color, they will give you information that really kind of colors it in a different way. And this, I'm not talking about museums that specialize in this type of work. I'm talking about repositories and museums that have these kinds of collections just appear randomly. So, for instance, a field archivist goes out and they pursue this type of collection. At the bottom of the collection, they come across a ton of images like this. Well, what is the processing archivist to do? Do they throw them out? Do they throw them out? Do they keep them? How does this play into donor relations? How do you create a finding aid for this collection without upsetting the donor? Because that may be Grandpa standing there in the center. How do you say Grandpa is there in the center in a finding aid? How do you prevent yourself from breaking that bond with that donor? The next image I retrieved from the Fair State Racist Memorabilia Museum. This one is particularly hard because this one involves children. Now, this image has been circulated on the internet over 1,000 times per day. It is a public image in the sense that you can log on to their website and you can save it and share it as you go. I want you to, again, take a look at this and think, how do we deal with this? In the field currently, especially when it comes to racist content, there is no methodology. Most of these collections, if you request them, they either really want you to talk quietly or they want you to go away. They don't even want to deal with you. They don't particularly like the fact that they have this material, but at the same time, it does represent a historical significance that they did realize at the forefront that they need to save. But as you go into the repository and you ask where this is located, sometimes you can't find it on the finding aid. A lot of times I couldn't find it on the finding aid. Other times I would go in and I'd ask, where do you keep this kind of content? And they said, in the shady part of the archive. The shady part? What's the shady part of an archive? What's the neglected part of an archive? Why are you even considering collections in this type of manner? It's because at this point in time, at least within our field, the mentality is, from the case studies that I've went over, that these are extremely controversial. They put not only a bad light on the facility, but it can really destroy the reputation of the archivist that's working on this because of the finding aid they put out. At the same time, we need to be aware that we cannot sit there anymore and not deal with these collections. The internet is growing at an exponential rate. These images, these files, these types of content are being shared every day, every second of every day. And we cannot idly sit by and wait for someone to come out with a method. We have to collectively sit there and go, what are the key words? What is the controlled language? We have controlled language for children's collections. We have very controlled language about how libraries deal with these collections. With this type of an image, I'll give you some examples of the controlled language for this image. Children's event. Christian event. 1970s, which is actually incredibly wrong because this is a 1960s photo. As you can see as I'm speaking up here, the controlled vocabulary is very limited. The descriptions are very limited. The description on one of the sites that does share this file, the metadata read, people standing in white costumes. I'm pretty positive that everyone in this room can agree, and the people online can agree, that this is not people standing there in white costumes. We have to prevent the bait and switch. We do not want people accessing our archives, our facilities, our repositories, or our collections, and reading this type of metadata, and then pulling up this image. It not only causes people to wonder what the archive is doing, but it also makes people wonder, why didn't they tell me beforehand? Now, we're going to discuss how to approach pornographic materials in the digital age. Now, every second, 372 internet users are typing adult search terms in search engines. Every second, 28,258 internet users are viewing pornography. Every 39 minutes, a new pornographic video is being created in the United States. That's just in the United States. Every 39 minutes. There is a ticker online that you can view, and since the beginning of 2014, we have had 577 million searches, individual searches for pornography. And we've had over 100,000 videos created in a month. Just brand new content. What do we do with this? Well, I decided through Google Analytics I was going to track the keyword search term for porn. And as you can see, through the months of January up to yesterday, it's very varied. We go from 800 million up to 1 billion and down to 300 million. This kind of content is being put on the internet and taken down as fast as we can blink. There was a day, yesterday actually, where I logged on and it was 443 million sites. 2 hours later, it was 782 million sites that had the particular keyword search term pornography. In a matter of 2 hours, we went from 400 to 700 million. How do we deal with that content? Now, the easy answer is to say we can't, or we don't, or we should not. Because 1.2 billion. The NSA does not have the capability to save everything we do. Their servers caught on fire trying to do that. So if you're thinking about an archive or an institution, especially an academic institution, we do not have this kind of space. At NDSA's national conference last year, they talked about archiving the internet as a whole. Everything on the internet, just a great grand idea. I asked a few people, well, what about this? What about this kind of stuff? What about pornography? Not necessarily racist materials, but pornography. And everybody gave me the weirdest look. And the look was, we don't think about that. We don't talk about that. We don't want to touch it with a 10-foot pole. Pun completely intended. But we have to, because in our field, we control what people have access to. We need to think about how we provide access to this content, because if we arbitrarily continue not saving anything, we're going to end up where we start saving things that are not necessarily a representation of what pornography or racist materials are in our society or culture. Now, I'm going to go into what genres should be preserved and what should be preserved. This is a current pornography listing of genres. Now, this is very, very limited, but this is the primary ones that most people think about. And we have age, hair, body features, subculture, bondage, BDSM, bodily functions, and other. Those are the main categories that are currently on the internet right now. The primary, the most popular as of yesterday. These are the most popular as of yesterday. The four listed, except for subculture, because alternative pornography encompasses a whole different subfield. But the four listed under are the four primary subfields that were the most popular yesterday. So as you can see, what do we save? Do we save the blonde? Do we save the water sport? We cannot save it all. It's not possible in our current ability with our storage capabilities. We have to start thinking in petabytes, not terabytes, because of how much content is out there. Now, what I'm going to discuss is which one do we preserve? So it's continuing on what genre do we preserve. We can't save it all. So we have a green octopus, a red octopus, and a blue octopus. So how many of you would save the red one? Okay, I have one. How many of you would save the blue one? All right, okay, so we got some more. How many of you would save the green one? All right, so more people like the green one. Okay. The question is why? And as you're raising your hands, think about it. It was completely arbitrary. Why did you choose to raise your hand for the green one? Was it because it was green? Now, what if I told you the green one was the one that had the most views? Do we still want to save it? What if I told you the red one was actually the most popular for that particular day? Do we still want to save this one? Now remember, we can only save one. Now the blue one is actually the original. Do we save the original? It's easy to say we can save all three if we had the storage space. It's easy to say we can save the original because it's the original and the subgenres that came out are the red and the green, and we can just recreate those. But how do we track that? How do we determine which one needs to be saved over a period of time? The green one had the most views over the course of a year. The red one was the most popular for a particular day, but it didn't have the most views, and the blue one isn't even looked at anymore because the green one's so popular, as was indicated by everyone raising their hands. The green one is the popular one. But if we remove the original, if we don't save the original, what value are we losing? What kind of content are we losing? What kind of information are we losing? Now, there are ethical concerns that I'd like to discuss. And first of all, it's should we collect individual personal collections of pornography? The answer is we, at this point, do not have a choice. Because collections are coming in the way they are, and because there are no genres or fields or types that we have agreed as a field on saving, we are collecting individuals' collections. How can we web crawl the internet for pornographic web pages that are upwards in 1 billion pages? How should institutions process this type of content? Age of consent issues I'd like to talk about really quickly. We have the cloud. The age of consent is varied across the world. If you get a collection from this country of Spain, their age of consent is a lot lower than even the individual states in the United States. So how do we deal with that collection? Do we send it back to the FBI? Do we keep it? Do we process it? Obviously we can't because we don't want to break the law, but we have to be aware of these types of concerns. Finally, what is pornography's value and historical significance? And what types should we be preserving? Now, there are 3 things I want you to take away from this. The first one is employee burnout rates. We have to be really aware of this because how many days can someone go in and deal with this type of content before they just have had enough? The next is we cannot hope to save everything, which is a point I'm hoping I'm getting across, but we cannot not save nothing, but we cannot save nothing. We have to start talking about this. We have to start considering what we're going to save over what we're not going to, or we're going to be buried under those billions of sites that we have no hopes of actually saving. And then finally, it's the manipulation of history. We control what researchers have access to. We control how the information is dispersed, and we control, because we get in the collection, and then we weed out what we consider necessary, based on the collection's needs, based on how the archive's going to utilize it, based on our own personal preferences. But we have to remember, we control all of this. We are the first line before even the historians get to this content. So we just need to make sure, or we need to discuss this because we don't want to weed things out arbitrarily. Now, are there any questions, comments, or concerns?
What museums or digital or archives are saving these collections now?
Currently, the archives that I found, there is one in Memphis, Tennessee. Here's how they phrase it. They said, we got in a collection, a personal collection from a major donor, and we found pneumatic tapes of him having sex with his wife. We didn't throw them out, but we had no way to really deal with them, so we keep them in the corner of the room. Because if we throw them out, they did approach the donor's daughter, who actually donated the collection.
Maybe giving them back?
Maybe giving them back, but she didn't want them back. She wanted them as a part of the collection. She wanted them as a part of the collection. She was like, this was my grandfather. This is what he did for a living at one point in time. So this is the content that I want.
Yeah.
So you might be stuck with it. Another museum is obviously Fair State Racist Memorabilia Museum. And then the National Archives received a collection of upwards of 10 terabytes of just someone's random collection of pornography. And from what I've been told, it's a lot of foot fetish. So do we want that much foot fetish being the drive of how historians go back and research the 1990s? Oh, there's our collection. Are there any other questions? Yes.
What is the scholarly community consensus on the use of this kind of material, of the sexual pornography?
Well, at MLA, one of the librarians said I need to open up my own business because nobody wants to touch this. But the scholarly community, when I first started conducting research on this July of last year, there were very, very limited case studies and very, very limited publications. From the people that I was able to talk to, they said, oh, there are abstracts, but getting this type of content published is very difficult. I was fortunate enough where this past few months, a lot of these reports and case studies that were published in 2005 are now being released because either the donor's lineage has completely died off, or the archive has said, we need to start dealing with this. We can no longer have our collections decaying in the corner because some of the kinds of content that they have, even though there might be a picture of someone exposed, the rest of the visual collection has so much value that we need to make sure that we preserve all of it. But the scholarly consensus is, as I said earlier, there is no real method to this yet. No archive at this point in time has a very laid out format, like a template, where we can just go, okay, here's what we do, A, B, C, and D. It's very subjective at this point in time. Yes?
It would be questions, comments. So going back, for example, to what you are saying right now, I had a question before, but I want the conversation go back. So you say that there is like no method, or don't you think, and this is a concern that I have with this type of material, that there can be no method actually, because depending on the collection, and then I go to my first question, because you were talking about a donor and a daughter that gives pictures of their parents having sex and whatever, but you have also mentioned pictures on internet. So
yes.
I see two different group of sets of pictures, like illegal pornography and legal pornography.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think maybe English is not my native language, so I didn't got the idea, but my impression is that you are mixing both things together. So I don't know how much an archive or a museum could archive illegal pornography, with the argument that, and I agree with you, because okay. we are then shaping social memory in the future, and we are shaping history. But then I think that they're like, even these guys that they realized that they should partner with many stakeholders. I think that illegal pornography is a very big concern, also of the police.
Well,
so I guess that the police has also archives. They keep this stuff to prosecute them people.
They do.
So maybe I didn't understand you very well, but I think there are two very different approaches to pornography.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. I'd just like to clarify one point that yes, they are two very different aspects. But in the case of illegal pornography, when I started this research, I did contact the FBI because you really don't want that kind of research on your browser. And they told me only do it at an academic university because on your home computer it automatically pings. So what they told me is what they expect museums, libraries, repositories, if they come across anything that looks slightly out of sync, that they should be contacted immediately and the employees and the content should be quarantined. Because of the age of consent being so varied from even state to state, something that may be legal in Georgia may not necessarily be legal in Alaska. Or something that is legal in New Jersey, where the age of consent is 13, in a limited aspect, not on all cases, is not legal in the state of Michigan. So we have to be aware of how these collections are coming in, because if you get that one image that is legal in a different state and not legal here, you do have to make sure you are following strictly to the laws of your particular area. You don't want to go outside of, you don't want to set yourself up for legal ramifications. So thank you for mentioning that, but they are two separate things.
We have time for one last question.
So Dr. Bejuan asks, she's curious about the typology of pornography. How was this developed?
The genre sheet that I put up there, or the actual typology of how specific genres are created?
It's an online question, so you'll have to decide.
Okay, well, I'll answer the first one very quickly.
She says slide 11.
Yeah.
Slide 11. Okay, how I created that was I used Google Analytics for the past 3 months just to go through and I just typed in a bunch of keywords and I said, okay, tell me what's the most popular over the course of a 3-month span. And these were the ones that, oh, excuse me, there's no slide there. Those were the ones that were the most popular over that course of time, and then they were the most popular on yesterday. But the actual way the genres are created is how the people name them by popularity. But the big drive there, the reason that they have the names they do, is the pornography industry. They are those leading digital preservationists in their own content. And it's not for distribution, it's to make more money. So if we take a play out of their playbook on how they deal with their digital content, then that might, as you had mentioned, give us a method or at least a stepping stone into how we want to deal with this content. Because they've been dealing with it forever, since the pornography industry began.
Thank you.
Thank you.